Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar. It's titled Final Wishes, a conversation about end-of-life care, presented by Dr. Brian Unwin, Chief of Carilion Clinic Geriatrics, Hospice and Palliative Medicine. I hope everyone's doing well today and brought their coat in with them because it certainly got a little chillier overnight. I'm Karen McNew-McGuire. I am the Senior Marketing Consultant at Carilion Clinic, and I'm going to serve as our moderator today. You'll learn about making a care plan, engaging your family in conversations concerning your wishes, important legal steps necessary to ensure those wishes are met, also more about medical plans and several other things. Now, tomorrow happens to be National Healthcare Decisions Day. That's April 16th. It's a day to inspire, to educate, and empower people and providers about the importance of advanced care planning. And I hope by the end of your time with us today, you'll understand in an even deeper way just how important that is. So we'll start with our presentation by Dr. Unwin, then we'll follow with some questions and answers. The best instructions are on your screen for how to submit a chat question and best view the presentation. And if you're in the right place for submitting your chat question, I basically put a little message in there that says, here's where we're going to be taking your questions. So enter your question during the presentation. When you do that, make sure you select all panelists so that we can see it and we can be sure to include it at the end. And we will address as many of them as we have when we get to the end of our presentation time. But for now, Dr. Unwin, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Karen, for that intro, and thank you for this opportunity to talk with you today about final wishes and end-of-life care and how to prepare for something that we don't like to think and talk about. This is where I'm checking my slides here, and it looks like we're good, and I do not have any disclosures for the group other than my employment by Carilion Clinic. I want to give special thanks to our patients and families that are so important to us and that enrich our day-to-day lives. And I want to thank everyone at Carilion Hospice and especially the crew that put this together today for all of us to hopefully learn and benefit from. Our objectives today are to make a care plan, how to do that, and what entails making an advanced directive in a care plan, how to engage our families and talk with our families about advanced directives, and then talking about those legal steps to ensure that your advanced care planning wishes are met. The picture that we see here on the right is a way. I wouldn't recommend it as a way of stipulating your advanced directives and how you feel about cardiopulmonary resuscitation. This this really couldn't be counted as an advanced directive. It would be very hard to revoke, and you're certainly hoping that someone has exposed your chest so that someone could read that instruction before performing CPR. So that's not the best way to do it. So what is the best way of doing it? Well, I'll start by sharing my family story with you. The photos here are of my mother and father when they served in World War II. My dad was a farm boy, born and raised in southeastern Colorado. He was a military policeman and a truck driver in World War II, and he carried on those roles in his civilian life after he came back. He met my mom in the mid-50s, and my mom is a city girl, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. They met in Pueblo, Colorado. My mom was in the Women's Army Corps in World War II, and that military service rolled over to my brother and I, who both joined the military. My brother was in the field artillery, later went on to be a corrections officer for the state of Colorado in the federal penitentiary system. And I served in the military as an Army physician for 29 years before coming here to Carilion Clinic in 2013. To tell you the story about why these end-of-life conversations are important, my family story was instrumental in my belief and the passion that I have for this topic because my parents had very different experiences in late life. My mom suffered from COPD and had mental health problems and late life dementia. And she spent the last several years of her life in long-term care. And unfortunately, and there's a lot of reasons for it, we never really talked about how she wanted to live her late life. And I regret that. I regret that for a lot of reasons, but the strongest of which is that when I was feeding my mom, when I was visiting her in a nursing home one day, and I was feeding her, I had this intense feeling and wish that we had talked about a lot of different things, especially about what to do at a time like that. My brother did all the real work. I was in the back seat. My brother lived close to them, did the day-to-day work and working with my parents and working with the doctors. And he continued that role when he was caring for my father, who struggled with COPD and poor vision. He spent the last couple of years of his life in assisted living. And again, Jason working, walking with my father through the doctor visits and the hospital stays. But what made it different this time is that we had a plan. My brother and I actually had lunch one day with my father's primary care physician to talk about our concerns and worries about our dad and to help our physician communicate with our dad about the issues that he was facing. Dad, I think, had a good death. It was on his terms. He did not want a lot of care. He did not want a lot of heroics. He wanted to stay where he was at. He just wanted comfort. And I think Jason and I did that very well for my father. What this experience taught me uh, was shared or expressed by Atul Gawande, who authored a book, Being Mortal, Medicine and What Matters in the End. And this is a terrific book for all of us to read if you have not done so. And I'll let you folks read this slide, but the heart of it to me is in the last sentence, that conversations and ways that transform the possibilities for the last chapters of our lives is something that we can all do together. You'll notice in my presentation today, I'm going to say you a lot. And by you, I mean if you are a person of interest or a patient, I I hope this talk is resonating with you. I hope this talk is resonating with you if you're a caregiver or supporter or a friend or a family member for someone who is approaching late life or has advanced illness. And then there is the you of the dyad, the partnership between the patient and caregiver. And I've shared some pictures here with you of a current popular movie that's out that is with Anthony Hopkins, which is terrific. We've learned of the death of Prince Philip, who was in a dyad partnership with his wife, Queen Elizabeth. A great movie in my times on Golden Pond, one worth watching, and the forever memorable Sanford and Son comedy where the son always dealt with his irascible father that was always seemingly cranky but amazingly loving. As a geriatrics doctor, I walk with patients through their late life journey. And to me, geriatrics is not about age. I've met young, old people, and I've met old, young people. It's not so much about age, but the health status and wellness of an individual. And when things are going well, it seems that you're on a broad pier. But as health gets more complicated, as health declines, as problems develop, it seems that your options and opportunities for care to really improve and markedly improve your quality of life seem to get less and less and narrower until you're at a point where you're walking a tightrope. And you, as the patient or caregiver, are often wondered, is it the medical problems or the medical treatment that's going to push me or my loved one off the tightrope? And what I'm hoping that I'm doing as a physician is I'm hoping that I'm helping you cross safely to the other side. And I guess to the other side, I guess, is a euphemism to hopefully allow and promote and allow you to have a dignified and honorable death that is on, as best as possible, your terms and not the terms of the disease or the healthcare system. Here are some interesting statistics for us all, leading off with the incredible fact that 100% of us in America will eventually die. Yet our behaviors don't address that fact that only about 50% of those over the age of 60 have an advance directive. And even those that are most sick, those that are in long-term care facilities, only about 2/3 have some form of advance directive. And unfortunately, for those individuals with advanced cancer, the first end-of-life discussion that happens is about a month before a person dies. About 55% of all initial advanced care planning discussions occur during a hospital stay. During a crisis is when we start talking about how do you want to live through this crisis or the next foreseeable crisis. And that's a message that I have for all of us today, is that usually these problems that we encounter in late life or with advanced illness are entirely predictable, and they shouldn't come to us as a surprise. And unfortunately, we often do not abide by resident patient preferences for treatment, and that's an error. That is a medical error that we want to rectify. It's important that we meet your preferences and needs. It's important that we meet your needs for your quality of life as a patient and as a family member. And when we have DNR orders in place, or do not hospitalize orders in place, our use of comfort measures and palliative care services and hospice services all go up, and the use of futile care goes down. But why don't we talk about it? And we own it as clinicians. Often we avoid the topic, or we don't have enough time, or maybe we don't have the skill to talk about these difficult issues with families and friends and our patients. But then there are patient factors and family factors of avoidance and time and access to care, and fear or worry that if we start talking about things, we will somehow create and generate a loss of hope in the patient. But the two that I think that I see most commonly in working with patients and families are these two issues: that often it's too late, or the patient and the family are living day by day. By it's too late, what I'm meaning there is that often the patient is too sick, or their dementia or cognitive impairment has progressed to the point that the patient's ability to express their wishes, to guide us through these difficult times, has passed. The ship has sailed, and the patient can't contribute to guiding their own health care in the future. And by we're living day to day, well, often that's the best you can do. But when you're living day to day, that often robs us of the opportunity to try to plan ahead for that next crisis or that next event, or to really take a step back and say, what's important here? And how would mom or dad, or how do I really want to live my remaining life? It's important we break that circle. Because if we don't have an advance directive, if we don't name a surrogate to act on our behalf, we're then turning to other people. And in the state of Virginia, in the order of hierarchy, a court-appointed guardian would be the decision maker. Most of us don't have court-appointed guardians, but many of us have a spouse that would then assume the role of decision maker if I were to become incapacitated. And if the spouse is not present, or the spouse does not want that role, or maybe cannot perform that role, we then turn to adult children. And if they can't, we turn to parents or older brothers and sisters, or then any other remaining family member in descending order of blood relationship. And you can imagine that would become a very time-consuming process, especially in a time of crisis. And then we're trying to make a decision in some ways by committee, or the people that are making decisions are people that you have not had conversations with. One of the key points of this slide is this: it's not a competition. And you, as the patient, when you are of your right mind and body, it's important that you pick a person that honors your wishes to serve as your surrogate, and then to make sure that that individual knows your way of thinking about how you want to live, how you define quality of life for your remaining life. But how do we talk about this? Because all of these issues are things that we've all maybe felt or seen, and we can do better than that. We do that by learning about the options for end-of-life services and care that are out there for us to use. And then we implement a plan to make sure that we're meeting that personal goal that we set for ourselves. We voice our decisions to our families and friends and surrogates. And then ideally, such as participating in a conference like you are today, engage with the community, engage with our loved ones, engage with our neighbors and friends to encourage them to do the same. Patient values build the foundation for this conversation. And the types of life-sustaining treatments that we receive are a choice. And often we don't understand how common these life-prolonging procedures or these machines are that can potentially enter into our healthcare. Because stepping back, feeding tubes, dialysis, and long-term ventilatory support are types and routine life supports that we can provide in healthcare. And those things may be things that prolong meaningful life as identified by the individual patient, or those same interventions may potentially prolong perceived suffering by that same individual. It's really important that we just don't focus on what do we do if the person's heart stops or the breathing stops. It's important that we not just talk about CPR. Honestly, it's important, it's most important about talking about how we live as we're experiencing the dying and approach at end of life. It's important that we share our personal values with that person that we're trusting to be our surrogate in the future. And it's important that we put these instructions into writing. And again, that surrogate, that power of attorney for you, in some ways is the most important thing that I ask that you walk away with today. The groundwork begins with the goals, values, and beliefs of the patient, not the surrogate, not the family member, not the spouse. The patient with the condition determines the terms of values and beliefs and goals. It's important that early on, as medical complexity gets bigger and bigger and bigger, or the condition worsens, it's really important that we bring and expand our team of people that are there to support us through late life and through the complicated healthcare decisions that we face, so that they are seeing your way of thinking about how you want your care managed. It's really important that we understand the current medical conditions that the patient is experiencing, and that we talk about not just the here and now issues, but it's important we talk about the hypothetical issues of, we hope that things don't get worse. But if they do, Mom, Dad, what do you want me to do? It's important that we promote hope, but it's important to also recognize that hope is not a decision and hope is not a way to make a plan. There are very specific kinds of hope that we have for curing of a disease or relief of symptoms, but the generic hope, a general hope of not suffering, is obtainable by all patients and families and caregivers. It's really important that we understand these best and worst case scenarios so that we can help our loved ones through this. And I think personally it's very helpful that we put your trusted provider on the spot and ask the question, if this was your mom, what would you do? If this were your dad, how would you approach this? It's important that the doctor let you know if you trust them and if you have that relationship with them, let them weigh in on that. It's often helpful, I find, to have a guide or a script or a booklet to help us through these often difficult discussions. And you see 4 programs there off to the right of our slide here. But I think it helps with reframing the discussion. So I've given you some examples here. If dad has come back from a hospital stay for his heart failure or another round of cancer treatment or surgery, it's important to break that cycle. Dad, I need to know what you want me to do the next time. Or if you're the patient, you're turning to your spouse, you're turning to your family member and saying, folks, listen, I'm tired of going to the hospital and I want to change the plan. It's important for us as families and patients to expect some emotion, but it's important that these emotions and these tough discussions allow ultimately for peace of mind. Peace of mind for the patient saying, well, I told my wife what I wanted to do and she's got the plan. And it's important for the spouse or the children. It gives them peace of mind that they are empowered to honor and reflect and implement the plan as outlined by the patient, as long as they have the right, as long as they are cognitively intact and of sound mind. It's really important that we map out the values at play for the patient, not my values as the spouse or the son or the daughter. I may want my mom and dad to live forever, but if my mom or dad is tired of their living, then I need to honor and respect how they want to live their remaining lives. And I need to reflect on what I have heard my loved ones say, and I need to restate what I have heard my loved ones say about how they want to live and their goals of care. And then we match those treatments with those values. Does it make sense to keep going to the kidney doctor if you, the patient or family, recognize that dad won't want dialysis? So it's important to align the values with the care provided and move forward from there. So if you've had that conversation, you feel good about it, you download your state's advanced medical directive. And here's 3 ways of doing that. And then what I would suggest is meeting with a clergy member that maybe you're comfortable with, or a lawyer, or your primary care practice, or the oncology practice that you're getting your care at, or the surgical office that you're frequently engaged with. But you meet with a trained individual to outline those and complete those goals of care as stipulated in the advanced directive that you use. This is an example of a Virginia advanced directive. And again, they have different looks and different appearances. But the key thing about an advanced directive is that this is a formal communication from you as the patient, if you have sound mind and body, to your family, your support group, and your physician. that stipulates your feelings and your approach to how you want to live your remaining life with respect to um, life-prolonging procedures or cardiopulmonary resuscitation. And once you've filled out that advance directive, it's important that you secure it in an accessible place. And the last place that an advance directive should be in is in the lockbox in your home. It should not be at the bank. It should not be in your lawyer's office. It should be in the hands of the people that know and love you and support you through your journey. Put it in a go bag, and that's the term I use for like a Ziploc bag that has your power of attorney and your medication list and your past medical history and your medication regimen, all of that in a bag that's ready to go if you need to go back to the hospital. And give copies to your agent, your family, the providers, the hospitals that you engage with frequently. It's important that you recognize that often the advance directive is not shared between healthcare systems or doctors' offices. Talk with the agent, your power of attorney. Talk with your family, your providers and clergy, those people that will be involved in your care. And if you're tech savvy, upload your advanced directive into the Connect Virginia Advanced Care Planning registry that is available. Perhaps you have an online personal health record like we do with the MyChart program that we have at Carilion Clinic. And it's important that you know that if any time in your future your situation, your circumstances change, or your caregiver, your power of attorney becomes sick, you can revoke that old advance directive and implement a new one and repeat the process. It's worth it that you have that peace of mind and that your family has that peace of mind for your future. It's also key to recognize that these advance directives are a communication between you as the patient to your network of people that support you, but they are not medical orders that implement that care plan. The types of orders that implement your care plan in a medical hospital context are things like do not resuscitate orders, or something that maybe you've not heard a lot about, and that is the physician order for scope of treatment. We reserve the physician order for scope of treatment for those individuals that have serious life-limiting conditions or advanced frailty, for example, say advanced age and associated Alzheimer's disease. This is the situation where the health professional is saying to themselves that they would not be surprised if you, the patient, would die within the next 1 or 2 years. This is the kind of document that you would want to talk with your doctor about if you as the patient or family are saying, I believe I'm dying from my lung disease. It's time to talk to your doctor about this physician order for scope of treatment. This form, another way of thinking about this is this form is for the person who is is at risk or is having repetitive bouts of medical emergencies that often result in acute care treatments or hospital visits and emergency department visits. These post forms, these physician orders for scope of treatment, there's no age requirement. Post forms are voluntary. There is no requirement for you to complete one of these forms. It's important that you recognize that these physician orders for scope of treatment serve as an advanced order, a future order for a future crisis, especially in an out-of-hospital emergency situation. It is rare that a doctor would come into your home in the event of a medical crisis and be there at the door waiting for the EMTs to arrive. The physician order for scope of treatment is that advanced order to tell those emergency medical technicians the hospital people, the emergency department nurse, what types of interventions they could and should implement on your behalf in an emergency. Because without these orders, patients will receive full resuscitative interventions. The types of conditions that typically warrant discussion of these physician orders for scope of treatment you see listed here. Those individuals with advanced heart failure, individuals with metastatic cancer or aggressive brain malignancies, people with advanced lung disease on multiple therapies and home oxygen, multiple hospitalizations, people who are on dialysis and may be experiencing dialysis complications, or who are saying, "Doc, dialysis isn't for me." Patients who are in advanced stages of liver disease, or those with advanced frailty, advanced age, or dementia that simply would not benefit from life-prolonging interventions as defined by the patient. This is another way of thinking about it, and I borrow this statement and I share that with you. I share this comment with you in the spirit of this discussion, that in my mind, as a doctor, when I start having a really good feel for how my patient is going to die, and I can envision what I'm going to put on the patient's death certificate, is a time that I should be having this discussion with the patient and their family. And this is what a post form looks like. It has patient information at the top and patient and provider signatures at the bottom, but it's truly a three-part form. That first, in section A, describes the CPR decision. You either do CPR or you don't. Doing chest compressions but no breathing machine, or just do a breathing machine but no chest compressions, is a pointless, futile endeavor. The middle part, part B, describes the levels of intervention that the patient desires. And I describe this as kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears thing. Let's do everything, every technology and full intervention that can be done to prolong life, or let's focus on comfort, or a middle ground of let's do some things but not all things to try to care for the patient who has advanced illness. And then part C is that decision about what to do in the event of the person potentially encountering a need for some form of artificial nutrition. This is the document that tells healthcare workers what to do in a future crisis. This is at the patient's bedside, above the bed, on the kitchen refrigerator, in that go bag that I mentioned. This tells healthcare workers that I will never meet what to do in a future crisis. Let's talk about power of attorney briefly. I guess if there were to be one document, one thing that in some ways accomplishes a lot of different things, it would be that I have a power of attorney, that surrogate to act on your behalf in case of your incapacitation or your inability to make medical decisions. I got familiar with power of attorney at a very young age because before military deployment, every soldier would have his will, his power of attorney lined up before getting on a plane or a boat to go overseas. There are two types of power of attorney: medical power of attorney and financial power of attorney. They can be the same person or it can be different people. But the most important, in my view, in terms of, for my day-to-day business as a doctor, is understanding who is that person that I turn to in the event of the incapacitation of my patient. Who is that person that makes decisions on my patient's behalf when my patient is incapacitated? The financial power of attorney is also important because that person controls the purse strings And those purse strings often govern the types of medical resources that can be applied to care for the patient with an advanced illness. I don't care so much about the wills and who gets the coffee cups and the collections of knickknacks and things, but these powers of attorney and wills are drawn up by a lawyer, and it requires that the patient must have mental and cognitive capacity to render those decisions. Because if the patient does not have those cognitive mental abilities to do so, the ship has passed. And now other people are going to be making decisions on behalf of the patient. It's a nuanced decision within families about who the power of attorney should be. But the key thing about the power of attorney, it shouldn't be the person that is most popular or the oldest or the youngest or the person who lives the closest. It should be the person that honors your wishes and desires, even if they disagree with them. And it's most impactful that the power of attorney understands your wishes about how you want to approach late life care with these life-prolonging procedures and interventions, such as hospitalizations, feeding tubes, dialysis, and breathing machines. Last couple slides. Some myths and facts about advanced directives, maybe to prime the pump with regards to your questions that you may have for me. I'll let you look at these comments here. And there's one more slide. Maybe look at the left column, and we can talk about that, about the facts in the right column. But the key thing is that if you name a proxy or you have an advanced directive and you are still of sound mind and spirit to govern your health care, you still govern your health care. Nothing is given up by naming a power of attorney or having an advanced directive. But we ask that you do not wait. Even a teenager, a young adult should have an advanced directive with a communication that follows it, that lets their team, their network of people understand how they want to live if they couldn't make decisions for themselves anymore. And one that I also want to touch on directly is that it is critical that if someone has died, or if you have undergone a divorce, or if you have a new severe diagnosis, it is critical that you update your advanced directive. And if you are experiencing a sudden decline in your chronic condition, or if you've hit another decade, critical that you get and update your advanced directive. Here are some resources for you all to consider. These slides will be available for you afterwards. And slides so that we can engage in questions and answers at the end of this conversation. Just direct your questions to all panelists and click the chat button, and we can engage and answer your questions. Please call us at Crow Clinic Hospice with any questions you have, or visit the Crow Clinic Hospice website. Thank you for listening, and we'll end sharing here, and we'll be open for your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Unwin, for that enlightening discussion. We do have a question in our chat category. The question is, I have progressing ALS, diagnosed about 18 months ago. I have the legal documents set up, POA, hold on, let me scroll up here. POA, DNR, etc. Family discussions about my wishes are ongoing. My concern is that in Virginia, there is no death with dignity. What if I am mentally ready, but my body keeps living with no quality, and then this same person has a follow-up?
The death with dignity question is an excellent one. And it is so complex, and it would be it would not do justice to try to discuss that in a vague manner. I I agree that having death with dignity is the most important thing. And I think maybe one of the things to consider for you would be to consider contacting your neurologist or your primary care provider, and ask for a palliative care consultation, and meeting with one of our palliative care doctors at Carilion Clinic to learn more about the symptoms that you're experiencing, the resources that you need, the resources that you have, and then bundling all that together in a fashion to promote death with dignity with the resources and the laws and the tools that we currently have is what is, I feel, um, most applicable at this time for what we can do for you.
And then I think that may have touched on the follow-up questions answer. However, the follow-up question from her was, is it a good idea to establish relationship with hospice doctor ahead of time, which I believe you were suggesting. She says that her neurologist is in North Carolina, but she lives in Virginia. So if I'm understanding correctly, reaching out to any hospice palliative medicine physician for guidance would be useful.
Absolutely, Karen. You're exactly right. And there are lots of resources for you in terms of these hospice conversations. In a way, you have time to prepare. So Center for Medicare Services has a Hospice Compare website where you can look at the national quality metrics for hospice agencies in your region, look at their quality data, and then talk with your primary care doctor, have the hospice a referral placed, or call the hospice agency, interview them, and learn about them and what services they provide, and get a feel for the chemistry involved, and then form and base your decision upon that knowledge that you acquire. But yes, you can talk and interview with people and learn more about the hospice agencies that could work with you in the future.
I think that's wonderful advice, empowering the patient and the family to make the best decision for them. We have another question that came in. How is the post document different from the living will document?
Great question. And the living will document and the post document. A living will is a document that does not absolutely require a lawyer, but it's this structured conversation. It's a structured letter to yourself in many ways, to your family, to the people that would be making decisions on your behalf, a structured way of telling them your feelings, values, and beliefs about the types of medical intervention that you would want. And what's different about that for the do not resuscitate form and the post order is that conversation with your family does not translate to a doctor's order to healthcare personnel or an EMT team coming into your home to tell them not to do CPR or not to put your loved one on a breathing machine. For medical personnel to withhold medical interventions would require a doctor's order to tell them not to do it. And that's one of the most fundamental distinctions, is that the post form is a doctor's order for unknown healthcare people, doctors, nurses, EMTs, to do or not to do certain medical interventions. That's the distinction.
And then you may have touched on this with that explanation, Dr. Unwin, but our follow-up question from a different participant is, lawyers can be expensive. What inexpensive options are most likely to be honored by medical providers in Virginia for documents concerning end-of-life wishes by a person?
Okay. Great question. Different resources out there. So one would be your local area agency on aging often has contracts or relationships with local bar associations to provide low cost, no cost wills, powers of attorney, etc., by just working with your area agency on aging. Another potential resource with that is your local bar association that will often provide scholarships for individuals that cannot afford um, uh, creating wills and powers of attorney like that. Also, law schools in the area often, as part of their classes that they provide to their students, will often periodically um, offer the community an opportunity to come to the law school and fire up their will and create their power of attorney under the supervision of a licensed lawyer in the state.
And then, Dr. Unwin, we have an additional question. What happens if I make decisions about my care that my family does not agree with? Can they reverse my decisions if I'm no longer able to advocate for myself?
So again, a great question. And the answer up front is yes, they can. But then the question is, why are they doing so? And I think it's important that if you have that advance directive, the most important issue is, again, having that conversation with your family so that those issues are aired out in advance of disagreement. And if disagreement persists, then that's also a time that you are visiting the question, who is my power of attorney? And who among my family is going to honor and reflect and embrace my way of thinking? And making sure that you have enacted a power of attorney that is then empowered to make that decision. And yes, we do encounter it in clinical care that families in crisis will often have this conflict of disagreement about how their loved one would want to be cared for. And we will walk and work with the family as best as we can through those difficult disagreement situations. But we always try to understand the patient's perspective, the support group perspective, and we try to understand why that perspective may be different and try to navigate our way through that.
Thank you, Dr. Unwin. I think the answer to this question will be very enlightening for all of us. If something happens to me before I can do an advance directive, who then is tasked with the responsibility of decision making if I can't make my own?
Another great question. In the state of Virginia, the person that would own the trump card would be the guardian. The legally appointed guardian of an individual is the person that would make the decisions. But very, very few Virginians, in the big scheme of things, have a legally appointed guardian. So what then happens is that we then turn typically to the spouse that would then make decisions for the patient. Or if there was no spouse, or the spouse declined that role and that responsibility, we would then turn to the children to make the decision for the patient. And typically, again, kind of going into a maybe a birth order kind of approach to that, or who is the person that is most intimately engaged with the patient becomes the kind of decision-making authority with that. And down the road we go.
And I think that shows just how up in the air it can be at a time when decision making is at its critical moment, and you don't want to have your loved ones arguing with one another needlessly.
Absolutely.
We have one more question. Can a POA be someone who is not related?
Yes. The question is, can a POA be someone that is not related? Absolutely. The key there is that it should be a person that knows the patient well, and it should be a person that is honoring and embracing and acknowledging the patient's wishes on how they want to live their remaining life experience.
When would my medical power of attorney get involved or speak on my behalf? There may be some confusion as to when am I no longer able to make that decision for myself, and when does the person I've selected sort of take over for me?
Great question. That point occurs when the patient is incapacitated and where that individual is not able to understand, um, that person is not able to process the medical information or communicate a treatment plan or decision to us. And so that can occur for a person being on a breathing machine and sedated, or that can be a person that is experiencing dementia, even in the moderate middle phases of dementia, where they do not understand the complexity of their health problems or the medical decisions that they may face in the future. It is at that point of incapacitation, and incapacitation is not necessarily, is not always, I can't talk. Incapacitation is that point where the person cannot understand, process, and communicate a reasonable plan of and chart their own course of care with the information that is being provided. That's when the power of attorney kicks in. That's when the advanced directive kicks in.
And we do have a follow-up, Dr. Unwin, to the POA initial question about relation. Does that require a legal document?
Does the power of attorney require a legal document? Yes. Ideally, yes. What happens often in a hospital acute illness context is that that document is not available. If we're turning to the brother-in-law to make medical decisions, there's not going to be a document there. But basically, it is a team collaborative effort for the medical team to work with that individual to establish that authority.
And Dr. Unwin, are there any final thoughts, key takeaways for any of us after this conversation? I think we've learned a lot. We have a lot of things to consider. But moving forward, any sort of additional words of wisdom?
I think the words of wisdom from me would be make sure that you have a network, a group of people that understand your way of thinking about how you want to live your life if you have advanced illness or a chronic disease. And that those conversations are honestly the most important thing. And if you can couple those conversations with a document, ideally an advance directive that says those wishes, then we as healthcare providers can work with those wishes and those people that you name on your behalf to chart a course through difficult times. And it's a frosting on the cake if we can complete things with a advanced directive such as a post form or a DNR to make sure that we're not engaging in futile care. And forms like the post form keep patients where they want to be with advanced illness, which is usually in their homes with their families, receiving the care and support that they deserve for a peaceful transition to end of life.
I think this is an appropriate time to briefly discuss the importance of hospice care. Personally, my family benefited from Carilion Hospice in the New River Valley, and that's at a time when, as a loved one, watching your family member fade and slowly pass away before you, it not only helps to relieve guilt, but gives you legitimacy to your decision making. And I feel like people my family didn't even know what hospice was at that time.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Peace of mind is achievable. You can plan for peace of mind. And by planning in advance, it positions the patient and the family to be in a less difficult place in a crisis. And there is going to be suffering in a crisis. But to avoid to avoid needless suffering. That's possible. And that is possible with planning. And so thank you everyone for participating today.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Karen.
And thank you, Dr. Unwin. You have such amazing dedication for your patients and the community. We appreciate everyone attending today. We hope that you were able to take some knowledge away from our conversation. You can visit carillionclinic.org/hospice and click on the Advanced Care Planning Resources page. We have tried to put as much information there as possible, helpful information about advanced care planning, advanced directives. The links shared throughout Dr. Unwin's presentation are also on this page. And we've had some of you ask us about whether this webinar will be recorded. Perhaps you have a friend or family member you'd like to benefit from our information. Yes, and it will be uploaded in the next few days at that carillionclinic.org/hospice link. We thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you have an amazing rest of your week and rest of your day, and just peace be with you.
Thank you, Karen.